This is the companion video to go with my read through of the football heist movie that I wrote. I'll be sharing about how I came up with it and why it didn't happen. Disappointing spoiler alert, disability and poverty scuppered my efforts. But let's chat about how I wrote a football movie. How did that happen? It's not something that I just suddenly came up with on the spot. I'd been thinking about the idea of an Australian football movie for at least a decade before I wrote this one. And why is that? Well, as Australian football fans will know, we would love to host the World Cup one day. We did actually bid on it one year. I can't remember when that was, but there's a documentary, I believe, about how the team who made the bid were, shall we say, out of their depth when it came to navigating the internal politics of FIFA. We did co-host the Women's World Cup in partnership with New Zealand a couple of years ago, which was a very positive event for the profile of football in Australia. But what I always felt is that to show that we're a serious football nation, it would help if Australia had a film along the lines of Bend It Like Beckham. In fact, one of the reasons I have an Iranian character in my movie is because I loved the Iranian football movie. It's called Offside. It's a 2006 film which was partially filmed at a stadium at the same time as a real World Cup qualifying match was being played, which just gave it so much atmosphere. It's a really, really cool film, so I highly recommend that movie if you haven't seen it. If we had a football-themed movie in the Australian movie canon, it would help, I believe, to show the place of football in our culture in a way that we don't yet have a kind of touchstone for in the broader media culture when it comes to football. There are movies that feature Aussie rules footy, but I can't think of any movies where football, aka soccer, is a part of the story, big or small. I could be wrong, and if you know of any Australian ones, then let me know in the comments so I can check them out. I'd love to watch, but I'm pretty certain that we don't have anything like Bend It Like Beckham. Nothing of that kind of profile. So originally my plan was to make a small budget local football film. It was just one of many movie ideas that I've had sitting in the back of my mind for when my personal situation improved, because I wanted to be the one to write and direct it. But back to the disappointing spoilers, disability and housing issues kept pushing all that stuff further and further into one day in the future. But since I already had that foundation of thinking about and wanting to make a football film, in 2021, when several things came to my attention, like all kind of around the same time, that pebble just very quickly turned into an avalanche. So first I learned that USA, Canada and Mexico were going to be hosting the 2026 World Cup, which had me thinking about, the USA is not really known as a football nation, but they are known for making movies. Then I saw a promo for Godzilla vs. Kong, which I was keen to see, but also when I saw the trailer, I knew that I knew Alexander Skarsgård's face. I wouldn't have known his name at that time, but I suddenly had that memory come up of Serpentine. I couldn't remember what that was, but I knew I'd seen it, so I looked it up, and my guess was Band of Brothers, but that was wrong. It was Generation Kill. Back in the days when we all watched the same TV shows. Anyway, that search went off on a little tangent, and somehow I ended up reading about how he'd gotten the Tarzan role because he'd been filmed at a football match. So, okay, European, Hollywood actor, football fan. So this is the second part that lodged in my brain. And then the final piece of the puzzle was hearing that FIFA were launching their own streaming service. And yeah, that was it. My brain didn't take long to think, okay, what if the football film I wrote wasn't a low budget local Australian movie? What if it was a big budget Hollywood star movie that could be in cinemas and it could also be on FIFA's streaming service like a month before the start of the World Cup, so that the American audience could get that big movie experience with a Hollywood star, but it also served to familiarise themselves with football for, you know, all the people who aren't that familiar with it, and to have a little bit of the football lore in there with the Jules Rimet trophy and building anticipation for the World Cup in a medium that, you know, is very familiar to the everyday American. And it would also be a way to kind of cross-promote both the movie and the World Cup. So they would naturally work as advertising for each other. And I thought, oh my goodness, it could even be playing on the airplanes as they're flying fans in for the World Cup, right? Such a good business pitch. I kind of knew I'd struck gold with the whole concept. So I decided I'd go for it and start working on it. This was in mid-2021. At that time, I was living in a public housing apartment block, and the situation got really bad there. I won't go into too much detail in this video, but it was so stressful that it badly affected my health. I was desperately searching for new housing, but I couldn't afford anything. All the prices were going up at that time, and I was in such a state of survival mode that it was impossible to be creative in the slightest. So that went on for about a year, and it really wrecked me. And it wasn't until September of 2022 that I finally had a moment to sit and write. I was pretty devastated to have lost that much time. And I knew that if the movie was going to be made for a 2026 release, I needed to get it out there as soon as possible. And so that's why I decided to write a treatment and not a full screenplay. I knew that the proof of concept was sound, and if I got the story down, it would be good enough to send out. So I wasn't too worried about that part of it. If you're not familiar with the filmmaking process, not that I'm overly familiar with it, but I do know that if you can get a director or an actor attached to a screenplay, which is them committing to being a part of it if it goes forward, then the rest of the process for getting the movie funded and into production is much, much easier. So I felt this factor would be especially important, because if the aim was to convince FIFA to fund the making of a feature film, which would be a new type of venture for them, a big name would make them far more likely to consider that. So as soon as I'd written the treatment, I thought the first thing I'll do is email it to Alexander Skarsgård's agent. If it wasn't already obvious by my previous mention of him, I wrote the lead character with him in mind. It's not like casting him was like a non-negotiable or anything. The main character can easily be changed for someone else to play that role by switching it to a different nationality, but I felt I'd hit upon somebody that had both the profile and the skill set and potentially the interest in the subject matter to want to get on board and help push the project forward. So, you know, why not aim for your first choice first? So I sent it off, and the email didn't bounce back, so I had some modicum of hope, but no time to think any further about it, because it was only 2 or 3 days later that I moved house again. So I was feeling like I'd managed to write it and send it off in the nick of time before I was dealing with all the stress of another move and, you know, setting up home from scratch again. For various reasons, it was a very big, stressful move, and unfortunately that email ended up being my only attempt to get the movie out there, because moving house again really did mean my health collapsed, and I just didn't have the capacity to do any follow-up or anything else. I couldn't think of where to send it or what else to try, but looking back, I can see I was having trouble thinking clearly at all, and I should have taken some time to rest, but I thought, oh, now I have housing, and so I signed myself up to start a course of study only a couple of months later, and I was already running on fumes. So yeah, I'm still paying now for how hard I pushed myself for a few years there. What I really needed then, and I still need now, is support. Yes, on a personal level as a person with disability, but also this project really deserved, at the very least, like a writing agent or something, someone who could shop it around and do the things that I just couldn't do. So yeah, one of the reasons I've started this YouTube channel is to hopefully find these people so that my next big project doesn't suffer the same fate of, just not being able to get out there because of my lack of capacity. So now that that disappointing part's out of the way, let's go through the writing of the story. I knew it was going to be a heist movie right from the beginning. It was possibly the story about the stolen Jules Rimet trophy that helped spark that idea, but I do remember at the time picturing the scene in Now You Can See Me Too, where something's being passed to and from between people with sleight of hand. It's in an entrance area with a metal detector, and I was thinking how cool it would be to have a scene like that, but all done with footwork instead. So as the story developed, I never got that kind of scene into the story in the way I would have liked, but it's actually quite common that the idea for a line or a scene that sparks a whole project doesn't make it into the end version anyway. But I did have Tiago's character in the story as a result of that idea. He is a little underutilized, but who isn't in an ensemble? So also in the past year, I discovered there's a Marvel's character called Calendar Man, who I know nothing about and was not aware of. So my use of that in the story as a nickname for whoever is the head of Augustus' family. So it would have been his dad that bought the trophy back in the 80s that Tiago was referring to by that name, but it wasn't meant to be a name that was known or used widely, like the Penguin or anything that kind of recognizable. It was really just a helpful way for Lars to connect the dots and trigger the start of the story. I don't think it would be a problem, but if it is, it's one of those things that, that can be reworked in the second draft. It's like, it's not a big deal. I'm interested to know who you would cast for different roles. Like who would you cast for Augustus? I wasn't really picturing anyone in any roles apart from Alexander Skarsgård. But for Augustus, I kind of kept seeing Martin Shkreli. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He's in lots of stuff, but what always comes to the front of my mind is The Bourne Supremacy. It's a short scene where he comes home and he opens his fridge and then he talks with Bourne and then they fight. So you might recall that scene. It's a very cool scene. And if you cast someone for a very short scene, they need that kind of screen presence that I think would work equally well for the role of Augustus. Yeah, but I did hope, basically my hope for the whole movie is that each character in the heist crew would be an actor who was from the country of their character. Like an Argentinian actor that Argentinians would recognise, but maybe we've never seen him in an English language movie before, right? I would have totally gotten some actual Australian football personalities in for the commentary team. That would be a nice Easter egg for the Australian viewers. Yeah, there's so many countries in the World Cup that I wanted the cast to be an ensemble of people that would represent a variety of the countries who play at the World Cup, and definitely members from each of the host countries of this World Cup, which is why I have Philippe as a Mexican-American character, because he's covering both those bases. So I hope that wasn't too controversial a choice, but I already had a bit of a task trying to narrow down which nationalities to include. So that felt like one of the few compromises that I could make, seeing as there was more likely to be a lot of Americans and Mexicans in the smaller roles in the movie as a whole, anyway. So, speaking of Mexican things, I am having thoughts about if the Mexican wave is even a football thing. Growing up in Australia, I'm used to seeing the cricket on the TV in the summer, and I wonder if the Mexican wave is more of a cricket thing than a football thing. Have I gotten mixed up with that? You know what I'm talking about when I say Mexican wave, though, right? I mean, if it is Mexican, it would be from a football, right? Because I don't exactly play cricket in Mexico. I have confused myself a little about that, but fill me in in the comments if that seemed out of place in this movie. Something else happened in 2021 that helped shape the story. I had watched the final of the UEFA Euro 2020 match, which was held in 2021 for obvious reasons. England versus Italy, I'm sure you'll remember, it went to penalties, and the aftermath was not very pretty, as can happen after big football matches when a whole stadium of people feel let down. But what I had watched in the lead up to the final is all the hype on the social media pages, the websites, it was constant posts, fan engagement, getting people hyped up and excited and raising the expectations and emotions. And then after the final whistle goes, it's radio silence. It's nothing. Days and weeks of pushing fans to a point of frenzy and then like washing their hands of it. See ya. Your problem now. That hit me as so weird. They weren't even my teams, but the rug pull on the fans was so blatant, and I was watching people getting violent after the game because, you know, they'd been wound up and they're not given any outlet for that frustration that had been purposely built up in them in order to, like, what? Get them to spend more money on merchandise? So that's what led to my including the scene where the heist crew sing a song together after they've lost the game that they played in Brooklyn. I wanted to show an option of how that gap can be filled. And singing together is something that people have done throughout history in good times and bad, and somewhere along the way we lost that. Our modern society is so bad at processing disappointment, let alone grief at this point in time, that, you know, there's this weird pressure to this, you know, good vibes only kind of level of interactions, even within our own communities. It's a society-wide problem. But I saw an opportunity to start having that conversation within the area of football. You know, to ask why only the winners get to celebrate together and the losers are left on their own, you know. And are you even a loser if you've made it all the way to the final? I don't think so. But why not have a tradition of group commiseration, you know, of a song that we sing together that says, yeah, we lost, but we're still proud of our lads and we're still together in this. So that's what I wanted the song to be. So I do have a working outline of a song. I suppose I'd hope to workshop something with real musicians during the pre-production process, but yeah, perhaps I should share it, you know, finish that and share it anyway. And even if it was used for the film, I would want the song to be free to use and not copyrighted, like how, I don't know if you're aware, but you can't use the Happy Birthday song in a movie without paying royalties, which, you know, actually works out well for me because I think the Happy Birthday song is an awful, dreary song, and anything's better than that. But movie or no movie, this kind of song, I think it should be something that belongs to the common people. You know, there are enough people in the ranks of the football industry wanting to bleed money out of the fans, so it would be nice to put back into the football community something that is for people to use freely. So yeah, it's the people and the players that make football what it is anyway. You know, I personally do not like music being played at football games, like how they have a song playing over the speakers during these new hydration breaks. Yeah, I hate that. I mean, let the fans sing their songs and do their chants, or, you know, just take a moment to breathe and chat about the game so far. Like, not every second has to be filled with entertainment. I should probably make a separate video about all that stuff and my feelings about the World Cup in general. Basically, I'm a Luddite, right? So I don't like the moving advertising screens around the ground. I can I can put up with the countdown for the start of the match. I just really don't like it, but I can cope with it. But not at the start of the second half as well. Like, really? Yeah, I don't like it. Anyway, time to finish this video. So, you know, I'm sad this movie didn't become a real movie because I would have loved to watch this movie. But I am glad to have a way to share it so that other people can enjoy it for what it is, and hopefully people do enjoy it. You know, I'd happily still option it if anybody wanted to put it into development. It would definitely need some rewrites because it has missed the window of like coinciding with the 2026 World Cup. But you know, never say never, I guess. Yeah, throughout this video, I've mentioned some of the struggles I face. So if you would like to support me so that I can have the chance to make more things that you might enjoy, I have a buy me a coffee link in my profile. Any support will be super appreciated and would be used to cover my basic needs so that I can put my energy towards these kinds of creative endeavors. Thanks for watching, and to my fellow desperados, take care of yourself out there, and I'll see you again with my next big idea.